So today we have the very highly requested Blue Jean Baby from Arctic Fox. I have my swatches labeled 1 through 12, but that is not synonymous with hair levels, if that wasn't obvious. Today we're going to try a green swatch, a red swatch. Number 3 is a natural red, 4 is black, and then from 4 to 11 we have a range that goes up to platinum blonde, and then number 12 is like a toned version of the platinum blonde. What I like to do is take the dye directly from the bottle and I'll put it at the top of each swatch. And then people do like to dilute their dyes, so I will be diluting the dye down the strand and I'll give you measurements for that as we go. And also really quick, I just want to say that I can't guarantee that this dye will turn out the same on your hair as it does on my swatches. Everybody's hair is different, so everyone's hair will take dye differently. Just try to use my video as a reference point as to how it could turn out. It's always best to do as much research as possible when dyeing your hair. So I'm noticing that this dye is not as pigmented as I thought it was originally, and that's not a bad thing. That just means the darker the hair, the less likely it is to show up. Even if it works on my swatches, that means that it could not work in your hair. So for the center mixture, I think I'm going to do 1/4 of a teaspoon of the dye with 1/2 teaspoon of diluter. And then for the ends, I'm doing 1/4 of a teaspoon of the dye again, but this time a teaspoon of diluter. Alright, I'm gonna let these sit for 3 hours roughly. I will rinse them out, let them dry, and then we'll come back and do some comparisons. So I personally have this weird thing in my head where if I see a dye that is dark, I automatically assume that it's going to be extremely pigmented and meant for dark hair. But that is not always the case, especially when a dye is more like muted and not as saturated. So 5 and 6, technically it did dye, but it doesn't really look blue to me. It just kind of looks darker and maybe a little bit cool toned. It does work on 7 and 8 as well on the direct dye portion, but I personally think it looks the best on 10, 11, and 12. Also, I did notice that the center swatches on some of these look a little bit patchy. I think that's probably due to how I applied it, and possibly because I don't use the diluter meant to go with Arctic Fox. I do want to make a video in the future comparing conditioner diluters and a brand's diluters and see if it makes a difference. It might be different per brand. I don't know. Either way, the ends don't really look patchy, so I do think it is how I applied it on the center ones because the center pieces are the hardest parts for me to apply it on. Now, since this is an Arctic Fox dye, I wanted to start with Arctic Fox comparisons. So to me, the one that made the most sense was Poseidon. So this is comparable to number 12. This is comparable to number 11, 10, 9, 8, and 7. I don't know if you can see the dog hair on my arm, but my dog is white and this shirt is black, so please don't be disgusted. So Poseidon is an interesting color because it's not quite a super vibrant variation of blue, but it's also not quite as muted. Like Blue Jean Baby is clearly a very muted color. So once it gets down to the darker swatches, it does seem to dye my swatches a little bit better than the Blue Jean Baby, or at least it looks a little bit more blue. The Blue Jean Baby kind of looks a little bit more ashy, I guess is the word, so I'm thinking that Poseidon might be a little bit more pigmented. I also did a red for Poseidon as well, so that's comparable to number 2. They both kind of struggle to cover the red. If you are looking to try and make a purple by putting blue on top of your red hair, you're probably better off either doing a more pigmented dye or just doing a purple on top, like Purple Rain. I also did a green swatch for Poseidon, so that's comparable to number 1. I didn't realize that I was so predictable. I really thought that doing green and red was like different than what I normally do, but I guess not. So Poseidon over the green definitely made it more of a bluish green. Blue Jean Baby over the green, it did help to add a little bit of like a mossy tone to it, but it's still pretty muted looking, and it actually looks pretty cool. The other Arctic Fox comparison I wanted to do was Periwinkle. So this one obviously is not going to be similar. I more or less want to see this compared to the diluted sections. So this is comparable to number 12, number 11, and number 10. It's pretty obvious that the undertones are very different. Periwinkle is even more cool toned. Probably why it's called Periwinkle, because it's literally periwinkle. It has a hair of purple in it, and periwinkle is also a very, very pastel dye. So even on like a medium blonde hair, it might not show up. If you have anything darker than a platinum blonde, you probably are better off just diluting a more pigmented dye like Poseidon. For Manic Panic, I've done one darker blue dye, and that one is called After Midnight. This is comparable to 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, and 6. In comparison, Blue Jean Baby is much more muted. After Midnight does also have a little bit of green in it. 7. The After Midnight does look a little bit more blue, and the Blue Jean Baby looks a little bit more ashy. Same thing for number 8. And then even with the diluted portions, you can really see the green pulling through on the After Midnight. The last comparison that I currently have is one that by the name sounds like it could be pretty similar, and that is Lime Crime in the color Blue Smoke. This is comparable to number 12, 11, 10, and 9. So the Blue Smoke, I would say, is the most similar, but on the direct dye part, it is not as deep. In my opinion, the Blue Smoke is more similar to the Blue Jean Baby when it is diluted. It might be a hair darker, but it's hard to tell the difference, really. And then because the Blue Smoke is lighter on its own, it doesn't dye the deeper swatches, pretty much. I mean, there's a little bit, but it almost looks the same, just a little bit ashier. So depending on your pre-existing color, that might help you decide between the two if that is something you're looking at. Alright, so now that we've seen all of the comparisons, let's get into the close-ups. Thank you so very, very much for watching. If you have a request, I do have a link in the description below to a form that you can fill out. Just remember that I prefer to do dyes that have not been tested on animals. I hope this video helped, and I hope to see you in the next one.